That's right, straight from the clouds. That's why they're white. All right, if you could come up, gentlemen. Okay, so for the audience, I'll just ask each of you, okay, Dr. Qatar, we know who you are. We'll just ask each of you to introduce yourself and kind of explain how you fit into the panel discussion today, and then we'll go into the conversation. Is that okay? Okay. So we'll start next to you, Doctor.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Chidanand. I head IT for Titan. And we are into baby steps into the cloud. So I'll just take this later on. Thank you.
I am Sanchit Veer Gogia. I'm from Greyhound Research. We are an analyst firm. We work with lots of CIOs across the globe on helping them decide the right cloud strategy. I also happen to be the CIO for my own companies.
Hi, my name is Ravi Shankar. I work as a CIO for Tata Sky. The advent of cloud, for us started about 7 years ago. We have some workloads in various domains, and probably that's the reason why I've been called for this panel discussion.
I am Romil Turakia, founder, director of Automated Workflow, AWPL. We write on-premise applications. We're a product company that helps in process management, document management, etc. And now quite a few of our customers are asking to help them move these type of applications to the cloud. And so we've got some experience with moving some customers on our products, so writing our products on the cloud and moving customers on the cloud. So that's probably why I'm here.
That picks up beautifully on what I wanted to kind of start the conversation off with. If we're talking about moving things to the cloud, a couple of basic questions. One, are there standards when we're talking about open clouds that we can talk about? Because a lot of people are worried about standards, a lot of people are worried about security, and also people are interested in how these clouds can interface with each other. Can clouds talk to each other? Do I know if I put my information in one cloud that it's going to work if I need it to communicate with another cloud? Those are some of the issues that our audience has asked me to ask you about. So who wants to take a stab at that? How about the standards for cloud?
Sure. Well, there are no, while we saw Dr. Ravi Kotari's presentation, and there's a great move towards getting to standards, we are seeing that they aren't popular as yet. Not many providers actually adhere to these standards. So what we're seeing is, so standards are for two purposes, right? One is portability of the applications that you write. So if I write once in Amazon, can I run the same thing in Azure and the other way, and in SoftLayer and in IBM, all the infrastructure providers. So portability is one area for standards, and interoperability is another area for standards. I believe interoperability has great amount of standardization. We're reaching there much quicker than for portability. So write once, run anywhere is not yet there, but interact with other applications. So my Salesforce or Force.com application can invoke APIs, etc., from my Google App Engine application. So that is there. Anything that anyone else would like to add?
See, when you move workloads, well, I would agree that standards are important, but I don't think so it's something which is compelling for me to look at standards on day one. I think as we go along and as the number of players in the market start to grow, and that's maybe one of the reasons you may need to look at standards, but I mean, if I run on, these are commodity hardware and commodity applications, so I don't see it, it's more of a hyped discussion, but I think ground reality, it can very well run.
I think in my humble opinion, we sort of oversimplify the conversation of open. It sounds very nice and fancy, but on the ground, as the gentleman on my left rightly said, there's not much is happening. Even if you look at the CIO community, not just in India, in Asia Pacific, in Middle East, Africa, not many are really aware of what these standards are. Not really many are aware as to if all the vendors who are participating in those open standards are really adhering to the standards in the first place. I think also in a lot of times what happens is organizations are not very clear as to what workloads do they really want to move onto the, which sort of cloud in the first place. So even before we talk open, we talk APIs, we talk standards, I think the workload maturity as to is cloud really the right sourcing mechanism, if it's a public or a private, and which workload should sit on what sort of cloud has to be the fundamental discussion before we even move on to the discussion of open standards. And because, again, as I said, in my humble opinion, we really oversimplify this conversation.
Yeah, so a few comments. I mean, I do agree with what Sanchit and Romil, etc., have said that, and to an extent, standards also evolve. Right? There aren't standards that are sort of, cast in stone, and the amount of following a standard has also changes over time. Having said that, I also think that there isn't, so some people also feel that I'm not that complex an IT shop, right? Maybe I'm a smaller IT shop, and I really don't need to, have that adherence to standards, etc. The issue is that if you are going to use cloud as one of the nucleuses of transformation in your organization, no matter how small or large it is, one of the advantages that you get is whatever is not core to your business, right? Whatever is not your core functionality, the advantage of cloud is that you could source it from somewhere else. So, so if payroll is not your basic functionality, you could get payroll from somebody else. And therefore, these standards become even more important because you want to make sure that, for example, the data models that are used in one is what is used in the other, etc., etc. Now, as I said, that they also evolve. So what does it mean? What it means is that if you actually adhere to standard to the extent it is possible, there would be an effort to separate out the specification, okay, the declarative part, from the actual runtime part, right? Every standard has to do that. It sort of has to bring out some specification and have some of the rest of it. That itself is a very good practice, right? Because if you need to do anything else, the fact that you have very nicely defined specification is in itself a big standard, a big step towards whatever else you would like to do. So I agree, I agree that there are various levels of adherence to standards, and maybe those levels are low at this point, but it's harder to impose it later, easier to impose it early. Sorry.
Before we move even to standards, I think even within the company itself, I think we have to look at standards ourselves and look at the enterprise architecture as a whole, much before we look into the cloud. And if you want to change your enterprise architecture, it takes 2 budget cycles or 3 budget cycles, I guess. So I think the strategy bit on if I want to go into cloud, we have to look at it, even if I want to adopt it 2 years down the line, I think we have to start preparing now and see what kind of standards that we start operating on right away, even though we are not on the cloud.
Yeah, sure. So I've observed standardization across several, when the J2E spec came out, standardization of J2E, and then providers adopting J2E specs and so on. And then various other, there are several standards. And I've noticed a common cycle. First, every vendor builds more and more functionality into their platforms, and that is their differentiator. They will not want to standardize. For example, I will say in force.com, it's easier for you to build a form than in the App Engine. Why? And stuff like that. So there will be functionality and a great thrust on functionality, and then there will be building scale. And once a few platforms build scale and there's functional, kind of parity, that's when standardization comes. So I call it the FSS. In that sequence, there's functionality, then scale, and then standards come in. What Dr. Ravi is saying is that bringing in standards now earlier while people are building functionality forces a certain amount of rigor, but I hope that happens. I'm not seeing it, I'm just seeing various platforms just competing with each other on functionality, and that's how it should be, isn't it? It's a free market type of economy.
Ask you, you said the discussion, we tend to simplify things when we're talking about standards. What do you mean by that?
More to what Romil said, that it's a very competitive market, and each time there's a new set of standards by a new set of alliances which come up in the market. So we see these alliances are very loosely coupled, and not always all vendors are really committal enough to really to even build onto these standards. And it's not as if that these standards are set in stone and they shouldn't really evolve. For these standards to evolve, there's got to be enough commitment in terms of dollar, time, and people from the vendor's perspective as well. So a lot of these times we see these loose association of vendors coming together around OpenStack and the other communities, which is always not really given enough appreciation, time and money, energy. So I think that's a critical element. On this point, I would like to sort of draw a corollary, if I may, please. The entire conversation on certifications for me is of similar nature. Back in time when software as a service became very huge, everyone was talking about how SAS 70 Type 2 was the right certification to have when you buy a SaaS. But my counter to that is that it's just a one-time certification which the vendor does once in a year. What happens in those 12 months is never really spoken about. So I think making cloud work is a two-way journey, and not really assuming that the vendor is doing their job really well. It really requires the CIOs to have some sort of maturity and change in their heads and think about how these assessments can be done on a quarter or a 6-monthly basis. For example, when you assess a cloud architecture, it's not just about saying what certifications you have and what sort of standards do you adhere to. It's important to talk about 3 things, which is people, processes, and technology. So let's say if you're using a public cloud provider or using a private cloud provider, it's very important to talk to them on a quarterly basis around what sort of people are manning your data center, what sort of people are actually manning your backup and recovery. From a process perspective, how often do you back up? What's the process when it comes to dedupe, for example? From a technology perspective, are you using a virtual stack? If you're using a virtual stack, is it a Hyper-V, is it a VMware? Are you using storage from a technology perspective? If you are, is that storage redundant, or will it allow me the kind of response times that I need? Because there's a classic example that happened in financial services industry. He was, this gentleman was a CIO of a very large firm in the country in financial services, and he ended up moving all of his workloads for H&I customers onto a public cloud, little realizing that the storage at the back end was redundant, and the response time to the application was so slow, was so painfully slow, that they started losing customers. So, before you actually even think about cloud interoperability, portability, standards, it's important to understand what sort of workloads are going to touch the cloud ultimately, and how sensitive they are to your business. I think that's got to be the fundamental starting premise, and not the other way when you talk standards. And I think the problem with the technology community is we talk very futuristic. We talk all the way 2020, but what we don't realize is, what should happen, what must happen today to make things functional.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? We want to make sure we take advantage of that right now. Anyone have any questions? I was asked if I could ask about the end customer's role in this discussion, and what is the role of the end customer? Who would like to start with that?
See, in a B2C market, a customer doesn't really care whether I have hosted it on cloud, whether it is on-prem, whether it's a hybrid network. So long as we service him and he's entitled to what he is, and there is no derogation of service. So it doesn't mean that we put that up on public domain and and risk our business. So for an end consumer, he is agnostic where it is, whether it is on-prem or cloud. He shouldn't be really worried about it, irrespective of the laws of the land, so long as the company is adhering to the laws of the land.
I think if you don't mind, can we have a show of hands? How many people, and don't throw shoes at me because I'm not very good at dodging, but how many people have a savings bank account here? All of us do. It's a very foolish question. Thank you very much. But how many of you actually stepped into a retail bank to do a transaction in the last 6 months? 2 people out of a crowd of 100. How do you bank with your bank? Mobility, e-commerce, and to his point, do we really care what HDFC or an ICICI is using at the back end? No, we as consumers don't care. I think that's the fundamental premise that when as CIOs we make a decision, we have to really assess vendors with a different light. That the vendor who's servicing me, does he really understand my evolving needs? If the vendor really does understand the evolving needs, I think it's a game which is won.
I think every company has a responsibility to the customer may not care for whether it's on the cloud or not, but I think it's our responsibility as a company to ensure that his interests are protected, whether it is security or including things like response time. It's our responsibility to ensure that he gets a good response time. So while the customer really does not ask for what, he assumes certain things, and it's important for all CIOs to ensure what those things are, and the technology provides for those things.
Dr. Kataria, what would you like to say?
I think, all the comments have been valid so far, but the big part, I mean, the question you had asked was sort of the responsibility of an end user or an end consumer, and it depends what we define as the end consumer, but the overall cloud ecosystem, while it brings a lot of free parameters so that you can optimize and really take your IT infrastructure to the next level, it is not just a technology story, right? Like most advanced technologies, it is also a story about governance. It's also a story about culture within the enterprise. It's a complex story, and it becomes successful and it gives returns. Large returns when all of those parameters sort of come together. So a good project thinks about these different aspects of it.
We had one question here from the audience, right there.
Yeah, hi, I work for IBM. The question I had was to Mr. Ravi Shankar and Mr. Chidanand. As CIOs of organizations, how do you sort of decide your cloud migration strategy? So, for instance, I mean, do you start the applications which are non-core and with least risk? Do you go the IaaS way? I know there was a SaaS model that kind of started off, but now everyone's on PaaS. They want their own rights to choose the applications they want. And they just want the development platform. And Ravi, of course, talked about all those OpenStack and Cloud Foundry and bases that we have. But could you just share, I mean, since you all have 7 years experience, how you have gone about the migration to your current state and the choice of platforms?
See, I'll tell you, the answer is pretty straightforward. Anything that we do not want to run in the enterprise, non-core, let's say payroll, for example, leave management, travel expense, which is really not tied down to my 12 million customers that I have. It was a very easy decision for me. That's not my cup of tea. I do not want to have infrastructure. I do not want to buy an application. I don't want to build a team and maintain 24/7. Give it to the best guy who runs it for me. I am done. So identifying the workloads is paramount. So these are some production workloads. When it comes to IT for IT, let's say we need infrastructure for test and development, lower environments. These are very strong potential candidates to move something on cloud, because you don't need some of these things for 365 days a year. So you can power on, do a little bit of testing the day you want and bring it down. Because now the world offers you true on-demand capabilities. So identifying the right workloads, whether it's for end consumer or for your own needs, is vital. And that's how I have really gone about in identifying some of these things and moving it to cloud.
The philosophy has been, very similar to what Ravi has mentioned. We have used all the three: infrastructure as a service for our, especially the disaster recovery system, of course. Then, we have done some work on PAS, force.com, mostly for our internal processes. And then we've also had software as a service in, some of our HR related processes are on the cloud. We've also used cloud for our collaboration, for all the 6,000 employees that we have, and for communication, chatting, and things like that, we are on the cloud. And so I think, and some of the smaller things like expenses, where you reimbursement, and those are things that could be on the cloud, and we've done that as well. So like he rightly mentioned, we are still a little bit worried when I want to put my customer data on the cloud, yes. But another point that I wanted to drive here was that we all think that just because we have things on our own premise, it doesn't mean it is safer. Sometimes it all depends on, of course, every company and how mature they are in their infrastructure. Sometimes the cloud is more secure than our own infrastructure. I think that you should assess carefully before you even take a call. Thank you.
We got one question here, and then we're going to have to wrap it up because we don't want you to miss lunch because it's almost 1:30. This gentleman right here.
Sorry guys, you must be hungry really. I'm making a little radical question here. I'm really surprised to hear that, standards are not mandatory right now. Isn't it a scenario wherein we end up being, you create monopolies and, the enterprise have to be stick to one particular cloud service people, and then, ultimately the customer is going to be charged against to that? That is one question. Probably, once you answer I will ask the second question.
Let me take it. The point is, I don't know why we are, beating this point of standards to death. Everybody has a framework. What is that we are giving it out? We are giving an infrastructure out or probably an application out. So both of this is under your control, and you know how this thing works. If I have to migrate from X service provider to Y service provider, no big deal. It's a simple migration that you'll have to go through. So I really don't know what's happening. There are standards for academic reasons guys will put up on the board. Why do we need to, spend so much time? Because those are not going to get really resolved.
No, I oppose to that, because isn't it that is the reason we are today? If you really look at the 7 layers of...
that is OSI layer IEEE. I agree with you.
Isn't it, because of that only we are today, the entire we are talking about connectivity, and, just now we had a seminar on...
I think we're probably mixing technologies. This is, let's say somebody has written a J2E. J2E is a framework which is available. Every company, every guy, you quiz your software guys, you quiz your AWS guys, you quiz your Azure guys, every guy will give you some 10 kgs of book on standards, what they adopt. They'll give you. But how far it is relevant for us to do a job from X to Y? Simple. So they have their own standards, so be it. Let's say I migrate out of PeopleSoft to some other HRMS on cloud, meaning it's a 3-day affair. How does life change whether I follow the capital E or a lowercase of e in a standard? I'm at a loss.
So you mean to say that there are enough interfaces are available to migrate from one to another?
The guys, 900 guys in this room will tell you it is a migration project. It has nothing to do with standards.
Recently, there was a news actually, when after Instagram was bought by Facebook, millions and billions of pictures were moved from AWS to the internal Facebook data center, and it's a classic case of migration. So the app had to be built at the bottom, sort of to make it seamless. But I think it's a doable activity. If a Facebook can move 20 billion pictures from Instagram to a Facebook data center, I'm sure we can.
We've got a question here from
Actually,
the
I
lady.
don't have a question. I have
Okay,
a statement to make
Sure.
to your question, actually. I am actually, so let me introduce myself. I'm the chairperson for Storage Networking Industry Association in India, which is a standards body for the storage space. And I also represent the Standards and Industry Forums body for Tata Consultancy Services. So let me just answer your question as I understand it. I think there's a difference between standards, compliance requirements, regulatory requirements, and things which become de facto standards. For example, when you look at the OSI layer or the TCP/IP protocol as it is used today at a technology level, it's not a compliance or regulatory stated requirement, but it's a de facto standard across the organization, across the organizations in this world, right? So I would like to differentiate between compliance requirements. Standards sometimes become compliance requirements, like the data-related requirements within different countries, data restriction requirements that may be there, data privacy requirements which are associated with the country, and so on. So those are become more regulatory in nature. But otherwise, standards are, like somebody on the panel said, it is a standard for the industry which may be followed more rigorously by certain members of the industry, and others may choose to opt out. So it is voluntary in certain aspects. Regulatory requirement is not voluntary as you would know it. So that's why. Does it answer your question to some extent? Yeah, so maybe you should join the panel discussion in the afternoon session where I'm speaking. Maybe we can talk a little bit more there.
And we can keep this conversation going because I've been told that we have to wrap things up or else we're going to get in trouble here with the scheduling gods here. So if we could, let's give everybody here a round of applause. If you want to continue talking, you can, but we have to wrap things up because also we want to give everybody an opportunity to have lunch too. We have some thank you, some mementos here for everybody. So we could just bring those up. And I've been told we have to do one by one, right? So here's one. A smile for the camera right there. All those things also. Yeah. All right, and the next one, here we go. It's a little bit like a beauty pageant. There we go. Yeah. All right. Here's another one. Yeah, you are. There you go. Okay. These are actually nice. Yeah. There you go. And for Dr. Qatar, you get last but not least. There you go. There you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry that we took so long. We don't wish you to miss lunch. No, absolutely.